Welcome to the chaos sector. A challenge has been presented to us. Yeah, some have seen their video in regards to a comment we left. Let's break down what was discussed, because we need to address this the same way they publicly addressed the chaos. To get a clue, we will be using your response video as our source to rebuttal. So, I hope there aren't any issues regarding that. For those who haven't seen that video, briefly, it's about Get a Clue, identifying a white Chrysler 300 as the vehicle circling Queen Road Apartments. We presented a question about it, and they responded in a very condescending way. We only dish out what has been sent to us, so don't blame us if this goes left. Now for authenticity, here is the post we left on Get a Clue's video regarding the Chrysler 300. Quote, "There's a question though. If you claim it's a 300 and that vehicle is owned by someone in that neighborhood, why would they get in their car to drive around Queen Road Apartments? We assume that's to monitor what's going on at the victim's home, right? They could just look out their window or hang out on the side of the building and keep an eye on the house. It's at night. Nobody would see them in the dark, really. But the light bulb will obviously be spotted, especially by the surveillance camera that I'm sure they know exist in Linda Lane Apartments. That vehicle, in my opinion, is the police cruiser who came back after someone called. The vehicle is clearly keeping an eye on the home. It circled from 3:30 a.m. to 4:07 a.m. The police cruiser was just there about 15 minutes ago after wrapping up those citations." Unquote. That's the post, as you will hear in this video response. Let's get started, shall we?
I got a comment from Chaos Sector on one of my videos. Actually, it was on this video. Which video? Let's go to content. It was the Chrysler 300 video. Yeah, the Chrysler 300 revisited, okay? So this video right here, the Chrysler 300 Revisited, I got this comment. It was way after the fact. I mean, this had been up for a week maybe. I get this comment from, of all people, Chaos Sector. We've all heard of Chaos Sector.
What does of all people mean? Oh, right, the chaos doesn't have the right to pose a question. But let's continue. That's the first jab taken, by the way.
Right? People keep telling me to check out Chaos Sector. I never do, but they keep telling me to. And so we're going to have a talk here. So Chaos Sector said, there's a question though. If you claim it's a 300 and that vehicle is owned by someone in that neighborhood, why would they get in their car to drive around Queen Road Apartments? I don't know, Chaos Sector. It's not my job to know that right now. It's not my job to do any of this, but that's not the point of me identifying the vehicle. My goal and my task was to identify the vehicle, and I identified it as a Chrysler 300. And I'm going to show it again for you. Okay, so my task or goal was not to figure out why this person would be making suspicious maneuvers around their own apartment complex like they did between 3:30 and 4 o'clock a.m. I don't know.
Okay, you say it's not your job to figure out what the vehicle is doing, you're just identifying the vehicle. Well, we've looked into a bit of your content, and you so-called identified the vehicle quite some time ago, and this was before this current issue. Just so you know, we viewed you examining the video footage near Queen Road Apartments, spotting that same Chrysler 300, found it interesting, thought about it, okay, whatever. So what's the next step for you? What is the next step in your investigative work? You identified a white Chrysler 300 circling Queen Road Apartments. Surely the next step in your investigative work is to find out, wait for it, why the Chrysler 300 is circling around Queen Road Apartments. Oh, maybe that's not your strength or interest, you just want to identify the vehicle. Okay, well, it's kind of stagnating if you're considering yourself investigating the Idaho murders, right? Anyway, let's continue.
My point was that, yes, we probably should get an answer to that, or somebody should, investigators should get an answer to that, whether they be Ann's investigators or whether they had been law enforcement. And my point and contention was that I don't think law enforcement ever investigated this. I don't think they ever investigated the owner of the Chrysler 300. So if you want to make the point that this person should be questioned so we could understand what they were doing and understand their activity, and then check for signs of, peculiarities with this individual, then yes, I think law enforcement should have done that.
Why aren't you doing it? You're claiming that it's that specific vehicle, you've made content about it, breaking it down. What's the purpose of revealing that it's that vehicle? You're basically claiming that vehicle may have been linked to the murders, but won't even present that as a theory, as you'll hear in a moment. You're alluding to it being possibly linked to the murders, and that is strange. There's nothing wrong with presenting a theory that the vehicle might be, keywords might be, linked to the murders. Based on your investigative work, You spotted the vehicle circling the apartments around the time frame the murders took place. Yet, in this video, you act as if, wait for it, you don't have a clue, or you won't even present the context clues together to suggest, you know what, let's continue.
And Anne should certainly do it. So that was one of my points in this and bringing this all up about the Chrysler 300 is that its behavior to me is even more suspicious than the white Hyundai Elantra, which is seen only one time on the 1330 Linda Lane camera. Chaos Sector goes on to say, we assume that's to monitor what's going on at the victim's home, right? No, I don't assume that. I do not assume that. I have no business assuming that. I don't know what this vehicle was doing circling its own apartment complex 3 times between 3:30 and 4 o'clock a.m. I think that somebody should figure it out, or at least ask this person and investigate this person fully. But I can't make the assumption that they were doing that to monitor 1122 King Road. I don't have enough information to make that assessment. So I do not assume that. I'm not assuming that. I will say the behavior does appear suspicious to me, highly suspicious, for a person who lives at this apartment complex to be circling it 3 times in the span of a half an hour, between 3:30 and 4 o'clock a.m.
What I'm getting from this get a clue individual is a bunch of mind games. Simple as that. And I think it's evident here. First, you claim you don't have enough information to make an assessment. Okay, so if you did have enough information, you could make an assessment, right? That means you would be willing to provide that assessment, or basically a theory, as to what the vehicle is doing, or may be involved in. Pay attention to what people say, because this type of blabbering goes over people's heads easily, okay? If you claim the vehicle is more suspicious than the alleged Elantra, isn't this enough information to make an assessment that the vehicle could be monitoring the victim's home? If it's suspicious by your own perception, then what do you make of that suspicion? You just kind of, disregard it in connection to the investigating you claim to be doing. We assume is based on the fucking investigation and everything everyone in the true crime community has broke down thus far. A vehicle is spotted circling Queen Road apartments during the time frame the murders had taken place, even based on Moscow PD's time frame, and anyone who is being honest and not shuffling their feet would come to the conclusion that the Chrysler 300 is possibly linked to the murders. Or some may even present that as their firm belief that it was linked to the murders. You're not going to say, my name is Bennett and I'm not in it. In other words, you won't present your thoughts about the vehicle possibly being linked to the murders. Yet, you will point out it's a specific vehicle that was owned by someone who stayed in the neighborhood, circling the apartments around the same time frame the murders took place. Yeah, would rather shuffle your feet around, jump through loops, rather than just address the issue. Someone presented a question to you, and you realize it presented a legitimate inquiry about that vehicle's possible role, and you shuffled your feet away from it. But let's continue. Furthermore, it was an honest question, by the way. We were just voicing an opinion about the vehicle he claimed was spotted.
They could just look out their window or hang out on the side of the building and keep an eye on the house. I guess they could if you're assuming that was the purpose of them circling the 500 Queen Road apartments. I'm not assuming that. You are, not me. Okay, you're making, and I'm just going to say here, you're making a lot of assumptions, and I'll get to my point about where I believe you go wrong here, and I think you go wrong on a lot of things as a result of this. You need to separate out theory from evidential analysis. The two should not coincide. And I think you do that all too often. That's where you get stuck.
Evidential analysis? Are you claiming that your claim of the vehicle spotted in the Linda Lane surveillance is based in evidential analysis? You have not proven that a Chrysler 300 is circling those apartments. You're presenting a theory just like many. So-called body panel comparisons does not prove that it is a Chrysler 300. You assume, yes, you assume it is. So first off, you don't have actual evidence to stand on. Second, a theory can build from the so-called evidential analysis. You know, like a theory that the Chrysler 300 was linked to the murders due to its circling around the apartments during the time frame those murders took place. Or even your claim that the vehicle was behaving suspicious. If you claim that the vehicle was behaving suspicious, then that suspicion naturally leads to a theory in your fucking brain, regardless of what you present to your audience, or as a rebuttal to the chaos. Whether you present it or not, that's up to you. You're talking in circles, and that's the mind game of get a clue.
It's at night, nobody would see them in the dark really, but the light bulb will obviously be spotted, especially by the surveillance camera that I'm sure they know exists in Linda Lane apartments. I don't know what you're talking about here. What light bulb would you be talking about that would be caught by the 1330 Linda Lane camera? What light bulbs? Are you speaking about the light bulbs on their car? Is that what you're talking? I don't know what you're talking about here. So that doesn't even make any sense to me.
We're talking about the fucking vehicle itself. Ugh, it's starting to get a bit frustrating. If you watched the content as you claimed, you haven't really, but then somehow have come to a conclusion about our theories, then you would know we nickname light-colored vehicles, in this case, white vehicles, light bulbs, because they are the most highly detected vehicles in surveillance footage at night. Oh, now you get it. Oh, okay, it makes sense to call them that, right? You need to catch up, dude.
That vehicle, in my opinion, is the police cruiser who came back after someone called. You're just wildly conjecturing here at this point, all right? You have no proof that anybody called anybody. I mean, it's just wild speculation. And then you're basing what the vehicle is,
Now, this person is about to be exposed. We'll let him go on his little rant for a moment, and we will come back to this very segment as he will eat his words from a bitter spoon.
The identification of the vehicle, you're basing it on this wild speculative theory that you're theorizing at the moment. Now, I have looked at your channel on occasion, and you do a lot of theorizing and a lot of wild speculating. I don't do that here. I'm not going to wildly speculate. The most I'll go on speculation is that from the profiling of this murder, it appears to me that it involved more than one individual. It also appears to me that Dylan and Bethany have to know more than they know. I don't know what the extent of that is, but that all is as far as I'll go on speculation and theorizing. Okay, so you're theorizing here. It's pure, and not only that, it's wild theorizing, wild speculation. I didn't approach this with a theory in mind when I identified this vehicle, and I told you in the video, if you watch the videos related to this, all of them, at the time I was having substantial doubt related to the potential innocence of the defendant at the time. Anybody will tell you at this time I was experiencing substantial doubt. They had to bring me back to center. My fellow brain trust had to bring me back to center, help bring me back to center. And so when I was reviewing this at the time, I was actually reviewing it for, I want to, now prove this was the Elantra. And that was my goal in mind. I was going to prove it was the Elantra. This, is this his car really that's circling the neighborhood? So I was looking at it with the perspective of an Elantra in mind. And I'll be damned, I could not prove that it was an Elantra. And in fact, I proved that it was a Chrysler 300. So my mind was completely objective at the time. I couldn't have been more open-minded, and meaning I couldn't have been prejudiced in trying to prove the defendant innocent. It was the opposite for me. I wanted to prove him guilty at the time.
You broke rule number 1 of an investigator. You don't investigate to prove someone is guilty or innocent. You investigate based on the information and evidence presented to you. Once you have collected that information, then you can, quote, prove that that person is guilty or innocent. At the very least, based on authenticity, you present a theory of that person being guilty or innocent. And he tried the slick disclaimer, stating that he was open-minded, and he wasn't sure if Kohberger was guilty or not. See, this word salad needs a bit of dressing. If Kohberger's DNA was found in the victim's bedroom, at this point in the investigation, never mind the vehicle, did you still have an open mind about him being guilty or not? Because you would have to be convinced by something other than the DNA to try to prove he was guilty. And if you're basically saying that it was the Linda Lane surveillance that you used as a determining factor disregarding the DNA, then I call bullshit, because you can't even identify a white Hyundai Elantra in that surveillance. So you're determining a man's fate by a vehicle that hasn't been identified as his vehicle. The vehicle hasn't been identified as a white Hyundai Elantra. Your software can't determine which vehicle that is. It can only resemble the vehicle, as it resembles quite a few based on the obstructed view. You can zoom in, add filters, trace an outline of it, and match it to the Elantra, and you still wouldn't be able to tell what type of vehicle it is. It's inconclusive, and you can't say the chaos was biased towards Kohberger because we broke the case down with the possibility he did murder those housemates. We collected information, we collected evidence, we broke down inconsistencies in Dylan's affidavit, and we obviously broke down the DNA on the knife sheath. We did the proper investigating first. Then we came to a conclusion: Kohberger had been framed. You, on the other hand, was trying to prove Kohberger was guilty. And that is bias investigating. You're not doing genuine investigating. See, a bias investigator is no different than a detective planting evidence against a citizen. In his own words, my friends, let's hear it again.
It was the opposite for me. I wanted to prove him guilty at the time.
Now here's the question. What would motivate you to prove Kohberger was guilty? It would have to be based on bias investigating. You wanted to prove he was guilty, although he had already been charged with the crimes. So it's quite counterproductive to attempt to prove he was guilty when he was already arrested and charged for the murders? Haven't you been keeping up with the case? They have his DNA. They have him spotted in surveillance. They reported he had visited that neighborhood 12 times prior. They reported he had stalked the girls in the home. They reported there is digital evidence of this stalking. I mean, he's guilty, right? Yet you want to prove for sure he's guilty. Hey, I don't buy it. Here's the more likely reason for your actions. You've watched channels like the Chaos Sector, where we questioned everything and came to the conclusion he was being framed for the murders. Yep, another DC agent. Oh, if you don't know what that is, it's a damage control agent. Put this into perspective here. A man is facing the death penalty who may be innocent. You are trying to prove he's guilty, though. So naturally, you are disregarding the possibility that he is innocent and are fighting to prove he's guilty so he can face the death penalty. Now, don't conflate this point. I would tend to think you wouldn't because you ask others to get a clue, right? So you depicted yourself as being quite intelligent, right? If he's guilty, then he's guilty. That's a separate issue. You trying to prove he's guilty, though, is your implicit bias against Kohberger, instead of having implicit difference. Implicit difference is basically the same as indifference. Now, due to Kohberger being charged with the murders and the DNA was claimed to be found in the bedroom, implicit difference wasn't the thought process of many going back to when he was initially arrested. But over time, based on many who have investigated this case, that implicit difference was formed, meaning some didn't know what to think, some still thought he was guilty, and others thought he was framed. But you contradict yourself anyway because you claim it's not your job to figure out what the Chrysler 300 was doing circling around the apartments, yet you claim you were trying to prove Kohberger was guilty. That's not your job, remember? Leave that to the detectives, right? Sir, you're a rambling idiot at this point. I hope you get the clue. Anyway, let's continue with this nonsense.
And instead, I got the Chrysler 300 out of that. I don't think I could have been any more objective at that moment. There was no theory involved for me. It was just, what is this vehicle that is doing this circling?
I'm not sure how to explain this without being sarcastic. Get a clue claims there was no theory involved in him questioning what type of vehicle was spotted and what was it doing. You're asking a question, sir. And if you're asking a question, by default, either a hypothesis or theory will be generated from that question. Because once you get an answer to your question, the brain, dealing with problem solving, the part of the brain that deals with fucking thinking, being the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe, generates various hypotheses and theories linked to your question and answer. So even if you won't admit it, sir, you are at the very least thinking about a hypothesis. And let's be real, you had a theory as well, being the Chrysler 300 was a potential suspect. But for some reason, you would rather keep ramming your head against the wall in spite of the chaos. We just presented a general question. It was a fundamental, logical inquiry about the vehicle's actions in the neighborhood. You went into panic mode and flat out lost control. Let me reiterate, based on investigating, because Get a Clue will try to claim he's just, quote, looking into things in the case. It doesn't matter, though, if you spotted 3 vehicles in that Linda Lane surveillance, all within the time frame the murders took place. One of them was owned by a resident in the neighborhood, one of them is alleged to be the killer, and the other is the same make and model of unmarked cruiser. What exactly do you conclude from that? Get a Clue would say, I don't know, maybe Ann Taylor should look into it, or L.E. should investigate this again. Basically saying, my name is Bennett, and I'm not in it. But he has tons of videos addressing the same issues the majority of people have dug into. So a hypothesis exists and theories exist within those videos. But when it comes to the exact time frame in that Linda Lane surveillance with potential suspects spotted during the murders, he, quote, leaves that to the authorities to figure out. He even has videos about Brent Kopacka. I mean, all of the videos are surrounding giving your thoughts, which are considered hypotheses or theories. But when it comes to the heat of the moment, the time frame the deaths had occurred in the Linda Lane surveillance, Get a Clue, somehow can't find a fucking clue. Mind you, that's the only surveillance released that is physically during the time frame those housemates were murdered. Yeah, I see his little game. You don't want to present a theory about those vehicles because it conflicts with your narrative that Kohberger was the killer. Yes, the only vehicle that matters in that so-called evidential analysis would in fact be the white Hyundai Elantra. He tries to focus on the so-called Chrysler 300, but had already so-called established that the white Hyundai Elantra was there. So the suggestive programming to his audience is that Kohberger was physically there, and of course was either the killer or involved in the murders.
The vehicle is clearly keeping an eye on the home. No, it's not. It is not. We don't know that.
We pay attention to context clues here. The first words out of this person's mouth was, quote, "No, it's not." And then they state, "We don't know what the vehicle is doing." The first response is a definite answer, meaning Get a Clue knows that the vehicle is not keeping an eye on the victim's home.
The vehicle is clearly keeping an eye on the home. No, it's not.
Yet in the same breath states he doesn't know what the vehicle is doing.
It is not. We don't know that.
Sir, can you make up your mind about what the vehicle is doing? You don't know, right? So how can you say, "No, it's not"? Don't attempt to throw that question back this way, because we're not contradicting ourselves. We stood on that claim, and that's that. Let me tell you what Get a Clue is doing here. He's trying to debunk that theory because it puts that so-called Chrysler 300 in the position of being a suspect, something he doesn't want to even present as a possibility for some odd reason. Anyone who examined that surveillance would know that the alleged Chrysler 300 Get a Clue claims is physically there, is a suspect. The murders were occurring during that time frame. The vehicle was not seen earlier in that surveillance, so just stop with the bullshit. And it's so perplexing because he's pointing out that vehicle on top of that.
We don't know what the vehicle was doing. All we know is it was circling the 500 Queen Road apartments. For all we know, it could have been related to something going on at the 500 Queen Road apartments at the time. But not necessarily that it was concerned with 1122 King Road. It could have been, certainly, but it might not have been either. The most that can be said about it is this Chrysler 300, this white Chrysler 300, most likely, that'd be an incredible coincidence that there happens to be a white Chrysler 300 that still resides there. The occupant still resides there and did then. That would be one hell of a coincidence. So I'm going to say probably it's a strong, strong possibility. It's almost 100% certain that it's that white Chrysler 300 and the occupant still lives there. So the most that can be said is it's highly suspicious behavior for it to be circling the apartments 3 times between 3:30 a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m., especially in relation to a massacre which was allegedly was about to occur, and for all we know may have occurred during that time frame. We don't know. That's the most that can be said. We can't definitively say it was interested in 1122 King Road and that's why it was circling. We don't know that. You're making assumptions once again and stating them as fact. The vehicle is clearly keeping an eye on the home. It circled from 3:30 a.m. to 4:07 a.m. No, it didn't. White Chrysler 300 circled the 500 Queen Road apartments 3 times between 3:30 a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m. That's it. At 4:05:42, it was the white Hyundai Elantra, which I have identified between the years 2011 to 2020. And then at 4:07, shortly thereafter, about a minute and 30 seconds thereafter, it was then what I have identified as a Ford Fusion. Then and only then a Ford Fusion. So we have 3 separate cars. So you're incorrect.
Is this real life? He's rambling, trying to justify himself when he shouldn't have made this video to begin with. He could have just responded back in the comment section and voiced his opinion. But no, he wanted to, well, I guess discredit the chaos and made a complete fool of himself. But that's what the DC agents end up doing. So let me get this straight. You have a white Chrysler 300 spotted from 3:30 a.m. to 4 a.m., then a white Hyundai Elantra, which we assume you're suggesting is Kohberger spotted at 4:05 a.m., Then, lastly, we have a Ford Fusion, which would be the unmarked police cruiser, spotted at 4:07 a.m. You do realize that every fucking vehicle coming around that corner has to come back out on the other side on Queen Road, right? That's where the victim's home is located. So all 3 of these vehicles had circled around Queen Road apartments, passing by the victim's home, including the fucking Ford Fusion you stated you spotted. Now, let's bypass the Elantra and the Chrysler 300 for a moment. What reason would the unmarked police cruiser be doing circling Queen Road apartments during the time frame of the murders? You spotted it, right? It's the same Ford Fusion the officers were driving in the body cam footage, right? Oh, let me guess, you don't know why they were circling the apartments. Oh, but I'm pretty sure you know what the white Hyundai Elantra was doing circling the apartments, right? Oh, they weren't circling the apartments. They made one pass at 4:05 a.m. and headed straight to the home. Mind you, there are vehicles circling the apartments during this time frame, and the unmarked cruiser would have to spot something, right? Heck, the Chrysler 300 would even spot something or hear something. Let me guess, it was the biggest unfortunate case of timing, hey? The unmarked cruiser had just left the neighborhood, and then Kohberger murdered those housemates, right? Yet we're the ones with wild speculations. Your shit is literally off the wall, batshit crazy. This needed to be addressed because this person is a DC agent working hard to convince his audience that Kohberger was the killer. So eager to do this that somehow he would claim that there were 2 other vehicles circling the Queen Road apartments at the same damn time that Kohberger was about to massacre those students. And one of them would have the power to stop it, being Moscow PD in the Ford Fusion. And it was only about a minute after the alleged Kohberger circled onto Queen Road before the unmarked cruiser had arrived. And then you have to also factor in the DoorDash driver. See, this is the problem with these true crime impersonators. Their shit always crumbles before your eyes because they're not genuine. The DoorDash delivery would be in the time frame of the Chrysler 300 circling, the alleged Kohbergers circling, and the unmarked cruisers circling. The so-called killer wouldn't be able to get anything done because there is too much traffic in the neighborhood. The DoorDash delivery would take a few minutes. The Chrysler 300 obviously is driving around for some reason at 3:30 to 4 a.m., and the unmarked cruiser is in that area doing some form of monitoring or investigating, right? They're not just driving around that area for the fuck of it. You have to drive down Taylor, enter the neighborhood, drive to the back, circle around Queen Road apartments to even be spotted by that surveillance camera. So why was Moscow PD driving back there, huh? Let's finish up here.
The police cruiser was just there about 15 minutes ago after wrapping up those citations. If you mean 15 minutes ago, as in 3:15, and you're starting this at 3:30, yeah, okay. But remember, this police cruiser was also on its way to another call shortly thereafter at 4-something. I forget what it was, 4:17, 4:15, 4:12, something to that effect. So it couldn't have been both places at once. So I would think if the Ford Fusion, that I identify as a Ford Fusion, circled this neighborhood at 4:07, one of the things I said, it would had to have crossed paths with the Hyundai Elantra, with the white Hyundai Elantra. It would have crossed the paths of the white Hyundai Elantra, both coming into the neighborhood and leaving the neighborhood, in my opinion. So that makes you go, because that's interesting.
And there you have it, gradually falling on his face. Despite trying to deny that it's the unmarked cruiser, the vehicle would be circling the same fucking apartments as the alleged Kohberger. Just like he states, that vehicle would more than likely see Kohberger enter the neighborhood and perhaps also leave. And then you have the Chrysler 300, which would also see Kohberger. Even the so-called DoorDash driver would be in the neighborhood around this same time frame. And yet, nobody claimed to have spotted Kohberger. If Kohberger was the killer, that town would have snitched faster than you can blink your eye. He's not from that town, they don't know him, his vehicle spotted, and he's physically spotted, right along with Dylan's description. The point here is the reason Get a Clue is fumbling over his words is because he knows it was one vehicle, and that was the very Ford Fusion he himself claims to identify, but at the same damn time won't claim that it was the unmarked cruiser. Because if they were there, then this means obviously, come on, this would mean they were scoping the victim's home due to being notified that murders had taken place. Or, get this, even involved.
Okay, but we know, for example, if that was a police cruiser, it had to be on its way shortly thereafter because it went to a call.
Your brain is like an egg being fried in a skillet. All of that damn stuttering. Claimed to identify a Ford Fusion, the same vehicle Moscow PD was driving that night, seen in the body cam footage from 2:54 a.m. to 3:15 a.m., and not claim it was the same Ford Fusion spotted in Linda Lane surveillance. Whose Ford Fusion is it, and what are they doing circling Queen Road apartments? Oh, you don't know. Well, you sure as hell decided to look into the Chrysler 300, though. Now, didn't you? And you would tend to think you would want to find out more about the Ford Fusion, considering it's the same make and model of the unmarked cruiser. He's giving off vibes of a plant. He exposed himself based on a general inquiry we had. It's unbelievable when you think about it. A phantom Ford Fusion driving in the area near the victim's home during the time frame the murders had occurred. What are the chances that it's not the unmarked cruiser? About a 0.5 in 5.7 octillion. No, wait. Let's increase the wackiness. 5.7 octatrillion chance of not being the unmarked cruiser. That's the chance that Get a Clue is hanging on by, though.
With those 2 guys that stole the sign. So, once again, I'll say where you're making your mistakes is you're deriving your identification of the vehicle not because you're identifying the characteristics of the vehicle. You're just stating you want it to be this vehicle because it stems from a theory you have. I'm not doing that at all. I'm just purely identifying the vehicle. Okay? Let me tell you why it can't be between 3:30 a.m. at least and 4 o'clock a.m. This 3 times circling the apartment, why it can't be either a Ford Fusion or a Hyundai Elantra. Let's look at it once again.
Negative. Not going to get into your nonsense. I want to know whose Ford Fusion was it, if not the Ford Fusion of Moscow PD.
That makes you go, because that's interesting, because it went to the ident, and then at 4:07, shortly thereafter, about a minute and 30 seconds thereafter, it was then what I have identified as a Ford Fusion. Then and only then a Ford Fusion. So I would think if the Ford Fusion that I identify as a Ford Fusion,
Yeah. See, with these fucks, they like to speak in riddles to keep from putting their foot in their mouth. He won't deny it's the same police cruiser, because it is. And that only supports our theory that it was the Ford Fusion the entire fucking time frame from 3:30 a.m. to 4:07 a.m., right smack dab during the time frame those murders occurred, even based on Moscow PD's reports. He only opens up the theory that it was one vehicle, because identifying the same vehicle we claim was circling the apartments, being a police cruiser, only justifies the theory that they were aware of the murders at that time. That's why they were circling the apartments. Remember, he hasn't given any reason for any of the vehicles he claims was spotted for circling the apartments. But the Elantra would obviously have a reason, right? And then plays this mind game where he even suggests that there's a possibility Kohberger could be exonerated. Get the entire fuck out of here, dude. You're not fooling anyone. Let's wrap it up. Which claim seems more logical between the chaos and get a clue? One vehicle being the unmarked police cruiser circling Queen Road apartments after the murders occurred, or 3 vehicles circling the apartments, including the alleged Kohberger's Elantra and the Ford Fusion driven by Moscow PD. We'll let the audience decide. Never mind, it's the unmarked cruiser. And Get a Clue is executing damage control because he's been sent by Moscow PD to protect their role in covering the shit up, and plays these silly Jedi mind tricks with his audience, where he is identifying a Ford Fusion, the same make and model of the fucking vehicle, spotted an hour earlier in the body cam footage, leaving his audience to figure out what the hell he's saying. Once again, that kicking the can down the road, my friends. And get a load of this. He even asked his audience to donate money to him, with a minimum of at least $1,000. Wow, they're really out of control on YouTube. And has a wolf as their channel avatar? I mean, it can't get any more blatant than that. He's basically calling his audience a bunch of sheep, coming to steal all their money, disguising himself as one of them. Get a Clue joined in 2022, the same year of the Idaho murders. In fact, November 8th, which would be 5 days before the murders. That's interesting. Quote, "This is not a safe space. Please leave now before it's too late. I am clueless and know nothing. I need to get a clue, but for the life of me, can't." There are many more informative, intelligent, educational channels available for your consumption. I'll suggest a few. First and foremost, JLR Investigates. If your goal is to up your game, that's the venue for you. If you consume that channel daily or even hourly, there is no need for over-the-counter vitamin supplements. Another suggestion is Tyler Feller. Everything he does in Jesus' name. And we all know that means he's pretty much infallible, and thus right about everything. I thank you in advance for speedily clicking away from this venue for the sake of your mental and physical health and well-being. JLR, you're pumping up a criminal? And I noticed Get a Clue went from titling his videos Idaho 4 to Bryan Kohberger. Why the change? Sir, is that a form of suggestive programming? JLR did the same thing. He would put Kohberger's photo in every thumbnail when the video may not even be about Kohberger, and apparently that's one of your inspirations. So you're a part of that group, Gray Hughes, JLR, these agents running around. Oh, you so-called debunked Gray Hughes? More of a technicality if you think about it. You joined 5 days before the murders, I wonder. What was your first video? It appears to be 8 months ago, June of 2023. So you're telling me you joined November 8th in 2022, and from that time, then the day of the murders, your first video regarding that case was June of 2023? That doesn't sound right to me. I smell a rat. This is mind-blowing. That's it. The chaos meter is rising again. Could have just left a comment in response, and this would have never happened. Had a general disagreement, and that would have been the end of it. But as the saying goes, the guilty always draw to the truth. This is the Chaos Sector.